Welcome to our fourth installment of the webinars. Today I've got a good friend of mine, Ian Burchnall. Ian is a native from England, came over to the States and coached. We worked together about 18 years ago. We were just discussing that. Seems a long time ago. Years are rolling by. Ian, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. We've got a bit of a delay on the audio.
Good. I'm good.
Okay, good. So today we're going to talk more about the culture and Ian is with his journey and his coaching journey. So Ian, why don't you start us off and start with your journey to where you got to now? Just a little overview of who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably start from the beginning when we first met, which is over in America 18 years ago. I kind of had just done my first level 1 badges, and first taste of coaching was going out to the States and doing the summer camps there. I went back home after that and studied at university, did a sports science degree at university, and combined with that, I got involved with Leeds United football in the community. So I became a football in the community coach, a lot of grassroots coaching, a lot of schools work, social inclusion work, that kind of thing. It's kind of young then and building up my experience, and from there I finished university and got involved with the elite academy at Leeds United. So I became one of the academy coaches at Leeds United. Was there for around 3 years, combined that with being head coach of the University of Leeds, which a position I held for about 7 years. I also worked, after I left Leeds United, I worked for Bradford City for 4 years with the youth team there. From there, I then progressed. I was around 29. I just finished my UEFA A license, and I got the opportunity to be assistant manager in the top league in Norway, assistant to Brian Dean, former professional, 20 years in the pro game. So he took me in as the assistant manager. So I became the assistant there. I was 2 years there. Then I moved and was 3 years in one of the biggest clubs in Scandinavia, in Viking, or Viking as they say here. And after that, finished there. And then for the last 2 years, I've been the head coach in the top league in Sweden, in Östersunds.
Fantastic. For those that in America don't know much about Östersunds, Graham Potter, who's now with Brighton, got a tremendous result. That was the year before you took over, I think, Ian, as a 2-1 win at the Emirates against against Arsenal. So that was their big time. And really, Östersunds have only been around. How many years have they been around, Ian?
Yeah, the team was launched it was like a former team, and then they kind of put together 3 or 4 local teams, and they were down in the 4th tier of Swedish football, and that was in 1996 that they reformed. So not very long ago, really. It's less than 15 years old now. And and only the last 7 years, really, it's been a competitive team. Graham came in it would be 9 years ago now, 7 years before I came in. And they were in the 4th tier of Swedish football. And within 5-6 seasons, they've gone 4 promotions, won the cup, been out in Europe, and like you say, gone to places like Atletico Bilbao, Galatasaray, Arsenal, and won. So the club was elevated extremely quickly, put into the public eye in Europe really very, very quickly. And of course, then Graham left to go now to the Premier League, and I took over. So it's quite big shoes to fill, really. But it's been a really interesting journey to follow the Östersunds one.
Well, and that's what I'm going to start with. When you were Viking, as they say out there, big shoes have been out there. Roy Hodgson, the ex-England manager, ex-Liverpool manager. Uwe Rosler, I think, was out there for a small time. How did you feel being your first full-time job? That was your head coach. You like your first head coach after I've forgotten what the coach was now that had left. How did you feel taking over that first head coach's job? And let me just add to that, don't say it's a bad way, but not as a non-professional player. You didn't play professionally, so that's a lot tougher to be able to break into that world. So how did you feel with your first job there in Norway?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's a really, really big club, a huge club with a big following, and of course, like you say, the history of the club with Roy Hodgson and Uwe Rosler. Just before me was Åge Hareide, who's the Danish national team coach now, and Pep Clotet, who's the Birmingham City head coach. So they had they had really, before me, they'd only gone for big names. I certainly wasn't a big name when I was coming in, but I've been there 2 years as an assistant, but I was kind of operating as a head coach because the manager was very much a archetypal manager who managed upwards, managed the board, but allowed me to have complete freedom over the coaching process. So the change on a daily work with the players wasn't a big difference for me. I wasn't too worried about that, but it was a big shift and change to manage upwards to a board, and they were very old and experienced board, and the club was going through crisis, and it was a club that had huge success in the 70s and then some more success in Europe under Roy, and they couldn't move away from that. They were always going back to but in the 70s we did this, under Roy we did this, and I was working with a very when he was there. The climate had changed. Probably in Texas you have there's a link with the oil business, and in Stavanger is the oil city of Norway, and with the oil price dropping, it was a big hit on the football club. And so the kind of remit that I had was very different to what Roy had, but it's very hard to still manage the expectations. So I didn't have any issues as a non-ex player. I didn't feel that really. I think you get automatic kudos if you've been a top player, but ultimately you're going to be judged on performance and results and the quality that you work with at the end. So it doesn't matter whether you've played or not. And I didn't feel that any pressure with that, but it was just trying to manage the expectations of a big club that didn't have the resources that it maybe had 10 years before was a real challenge, actually.
Man, that's some good information in there. So Ian, you're saying about the manager was really upward management, so he was taking care of all the board and stuff, and you were taking care of the coaching. So was the philosophy, was the game plan? Did you really have a big say in how the team was going to play and how they were going to perform, and systems and tactics?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd gone to Sarpsborg first as assistant, and Brian Dean had worked with me at the university in Leeds, and I was leading all the sessions at the university. So when we went to Sarpsborg, Brian said, I want this to continue. You to lead the sessions, have the tactical remit, have the tactical meetings, but I want to manage the players, pick the team, manage individuals, manage the board. And that suited me great because I got to do all the good bits, which was the coaching. And when it came to dropping players, I could leave that to Brian. And I think I was recruited by Viking for the same principle, that they had a very much more of an old school manager that liked to manage upwards, and he did it fantastically. He just wanted to pick the team, and he wasn't too bothered the processes on the pitch. He trusted me with them, so that was good. The only difference was, I felt, when I became the manager myself, was I was still trying to do everything I was doing before, plus managing upwards, and actually it was a lot more to do than I would have comprehended. And I think looking back, it was I was 33, first job, big pressure. I could have delegated out and managed upwards better and managed downwards to my staff to relieve the pressure a bit. So it's quite interesting seeing the change from being almost like a head coach with a manager and then purely being that sole head coach.
Yeah. So with the players, I mean, and I know they sold quite a few in Viking at the time because of the financial difficulties, but how was the relationship with the players, and how they reacted to you and you reacted to them? How was that culture and relationship at Viking? Excuse me.
I had a very good relationship with the players, but there is a difficulty, actually, I have to say, going from being assistant to a manager in the same club, because you have a very different role when you're an assistant in terms of how you communicate with the players. The players kind of entrust you with information that maybe they want you to pass on to the head coach, or they want you to know, but they might not want the head coach to know. And then they've divulged a lot of information to you, and then suddenly you're the one in charge, and maybe you know more of their vulnerabilities than they'd like you to know because you've been more of a closer confidant. And then, so it was a change in dynamic for me on how to. So I tried to make the transition quite smooth and still try to communicate with the players on the same kind of level. But of course, when you're dropping the players then and talking to them, there is a difference. And so I think actually switching from assistant to manager in the same club can sometimes be a challenge with the relationship with the players, and you have to work quite hard at that.
Yeah, no, I can see that. So was there anything when you were at the Viking, and we'll talk about Östersunds as well, maybe, that you perceived as obstacles you had to go over because of your non-playing background?
No, but you know what? It was probably going in the first professional club I went in Sarpsborg, stepping from youth team to being in the, if you like, the elite pro game. I think that was my biggest concern or biggest fear, was how am I going to be perceived? You know, should I sit at this table with all these other guys when I haven't played, or I've got no name, or nobody knows who I am? I was 29 when I took my first assistant role, and it was like, are they going to respond to me? But actually, you know what I found is, majority of players, when they get a new manager coming in or new coach coming in, they often will ask the question, what can this coach do for me? How can this coach help me develop? How can this coach help me be better? So I think that they just want to see how you might be able to benefit their development. And when you realize that players are also vulnerable, they make mistakes, they have fears as well. When you get into that environment and realize that, then you can start to work with them a little bit. And when you start to work with them and they realize that you're there to help them and develop them, I think that straight away, they don't care if you've been a 500 league games or no league games. It's only about, as a player, you want to develop and get better and improve and learn. And you want a coach that can help you do that. So I think that it was important for me to show the players through the training, through communication, and through the way in which we work, that I can help you get better. And I think then they didn't care what my background was, really.
And I think that's for any coach that's listening and watching this down the road. That's some great information there. Just if you're a coach, you're a coach. Let's coach your players. So that's great. So, and we're staying with Vikings for a little bit longer, but the academy program, the youth academy at Viking, with losing a lot of players through selling them, did you have a relationship with the academy program to be able to bring up those players? And if so, how was that culture between the two to try and get the best out of them?
Yeah, I mean, they had a good academy, actually, a well-organized academy with some good coaches in there, and it had a good history of developing a lot of good players through into the first team. I think players that you won't have heard of, but you know, we have players that have went out and eventually have played in Lazio now and Red Bull Salzburg, and played out in top leagues that have come through that academy. So that there was a history there that they could produce players. The only difference, and I had a good working relationship with the academy coaches. The biggest challenge was that the academy was not based at the same site as the first team. So you lose a little bit of the connection and the relationship building between coaching staff and players and things like that. And what had happened is, because of the money that they had years before, they built a brand new stadium, arena and first team facility, and kept the academy on the other side of town in its own individual facility. And then you lacked a little bit of connection, but still, you know, we always went down and watched the under 19s, watched the reserve team games, watched the 21s games. So there was a good link. I would say the only problem that we had was when you're forced into using academy players because of economy, you can often play, you know, you have no choice. You have to play those players. And what happens is you're playing players perhaps before they're ready to be played. And that can be tough for them in their own development. So suddenly we had to, like you said before, we had to sell quite a few players. And when we had to sell those players, then it was like, well, we can't buy any in because of the economy. You're going to have to look to the academy. That's great. I don't mind using young players, but a couple of them were not quite ready to be, you know, sent out against top teams in our league like Rosenborg, Molde, and these sort of sides. And suddenly they were exposed to that in front of, you know, 15, 20,000 people in a stadium. And that can be detrimental to development. So I think when you're forced to use the academy players, it can be a challenge to get them prepared, ready, and capable of doing it under quite a lot of stress.
Yeah, I guess psychology would be a big part of that in front of 15,000 fans, you know, chanting it. Yeah. So, okay. So, so we're going to move on a little bit now. So we talked a little bit before we came on, but what about you've been in Norway, and then now, of course, you're in Sweden. So let's talk about the language and the culture of the language within the clubs that you've been at, and how you've been able to manage that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I should say is that in Scandinavia, the level on English is scary, really. You know, I could talk to the kids in the 10-year-old group, and they're perfect fluent English. So it's amazing how competent they are at English, and everybody that I've met that has worked in a football club is completely fluent, both in written, writing, and of course in speaking. So for us, it was quite easy going in and being able to coach in English. And one thing that they said to us was they liked us coaching in English because, I don't know why, but maybe they've a huge passion in Scandinavia for English football and a big connection with it. So then to have English coaches over was I think it was quite inspirational for them to hear in English the messages being delivered. So they quite like that. But I also made a concerted effort to speak the language. So I went to a language school. I spent time doing that so that I understood. It's quite handy so you can understand what the players are saying about you behind your back. So that's a good thing to know. But I picked up on the language. I was competent in Norwegian by the time I left. Swedish is very similar, so I can understand quite a bit, and I'm switching the languages now. So I think it's important to have a grasp of the local language, one, out of respect, and two, because it is good sometimes to tune into the conversations, or sometimes to be able to flick between it. But I've always used English as my common language, and in Östersund here we have about 9 different nationalities, so the common language is English anyway. So I tend to coach in English, but certainly I've worked at getting an understanding. And I think if you are working with the younger players in the clubs, it's very good to know the local language.
Well, and I guess working with the media as well and understanding the language would probably help with that as well, or do they speak English in the media as well?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, like now after the game, we have live press conferences with the TV, but they ask me in English and I answer in English, because if I want, because my Swedish is okay, I can't fully express what I'm thinking about the game in Swedish. So if I want to give them more detail, I have to do it in English. But of course, the opposition coach is speaking in Swedish, so it's good for me to know what he's saying. And sometimes I'll try to converse with the opposition coach in Swedish. So just a more respect thing. And sometimes the press will ask me if they can ask me in Swedish, maybe I can answer in English, or, you know, so it's good to be able to know the languages.
Absolutely. I think that's a common denominator across all professional sports, even here. I mean, you know, speak Spanish and English. Well, a level of English. My English ain't that great, but a level of Spanish is always good as well. So, so I found it interesting on the Östersunds culture, talking about culture and development. So I'm going to let you give us a little bit more about the interesting things that the club does outside of playing years. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the culture, connecting with the people, and engagement with the people and the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a club that has tried to think outside the box for the way in which it works and the way in which it wants to do things. So there has been a few things that the club has done historically before I came, to try to create a culture, team building, so that they run a lot of cultural events. So they've done all sorts of things, they've written books, they've done book recitals, they've done a musical, they've done Swan Lake, dancing, ballet. We did a full musical theatre production last year. We sang with a choir in front of I don't know, 500-600 people. So we've done a lot of very peculiar and strange things. It was like the brainchild of the former chairman, who I think his background was the army, and he kind of had this thing about taking people out of their comfort zone. And if you're comfortable singing solo in front of 500 people on a stage, then playing in the Emirates is easy. So this kind of thought process that I'm going to take players totally out of a comfort zone, make them work together in something that they don't believe that they can do. And like the process is kind of like a game, you know, we have to audition, we have to train, we have to practice together, we have to work on like dance routines, on singing songs, and then it has to all be put together to deliver it on one night. And I think we sold out the theatre. We had 3 performances in one evening, and we sold it out. It was 500 in each audience, so it's about 1,500 people we were doing this musical theatre production to. And you do feel like you're shaking before you go on stage, because I can talk in front of press and in front of a lot of people about things I'm comfortable with, but singing and dancing, I'm terrified of doing. But then you're all doing it together, and when you get off the stage, the feeling of accomplishment, and I think it bonds the team quite well. So there's been some very, very unusual cultural things that the club has kind of had. It's in everybody's contract. We have to participate. We have to do it. And everybody goes in on it. Everybody, not just the players, but the staff, the extended staff like sales, marketing, the CEO, everybody's in on it. And we have to work together as a club on it. So it's very, very different to anything that I've done before, but it's a very interesting concept to develop, being outside of your comfort zone and challenging each other to work together on something. I think it does give you a little something extra out on the pitch.
So talking to some of the players that are coming into you and you're saying this is what we've got to do, what's their initial reaction to those? I can imagine some from the UK coming over and they ain't doing that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they're told about it. Yeah, I mean, they're told about it, and I don't think they really understand what we're saying until they turn up, and it's like we're in a dance studio with a dance teacher, and they're like at the front of the class doing dance moves and then singing, and they're like, they do think, you know, what the hell are we doing here? Like, what is this? But then, and I think we had a lot of players this year. Last year we signed a lot of players because we had a huge turnover, and I think a lot of them were going because we have, like, during the year, maybe once or twice a month in an evening, we'll like practice at the culture event. And then, like, when the season finishes, we have like 1 week intense auditions and practices until we do it. And like, I think during the year, the boys are like, why are we doing this? This is just like spare time, taking energy, especially if you've lost a couple of games, and then to motivate yourself to turn up to do singing or dancing or something daft. They're like, they can't see the value in it. But I think when they see the complete performance at the end and how it comes together for that duration of work, they actually see the value of it. And I've spoke to a couple of the English lads. We got a player that was in Chelsea, and he said, wow, I wish we'd done this halfway through the season because it's great for the team. You know, I wish our performance was halfway through rather than the end. So it was, I think they took a lot, very left field and very different. I don't think you could just do it. You couldn't start this at another club. I think it's something that's had to work up. But I totally see the value of taking players out of a comfort zone, exposing weakness, exposing vulnerability, exposing fear, and then working together to overcome it. I see it as a massively beneficial team thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So how do you feel that cultural experience connects you with your publics around you, with your community? Do you think it gives them a sense of giving back, or do you think it builds stronger connection so they'll come and watch you on weekends?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the supporters love it, and I think because it is so different to anything anyone else has, it's kind of ours. It's Östersunds, and it's kind of synonymous with us. Nobody else. If anybody else does it in Sweden now, they're just copying us. So we did it first, and I think the supporters, they absolutely love to turn up and see the players that they idolize and the people that they support on a match day, to go to a theatre and watch them do something, you know, make jokes and make a fool of themselves. I think it shows it shows our vulnerability to the supporters as well, and shows that we're normal, and we're scared of doing this, and we make mistakes and we look daft, but we kind of do it for them. And I think, you know, it doesn't matter how bad we are, as long as we put in a lot of effort, I think they really, really like it. So, and we try to do a lot in the community to support a lot of the things that go on. You know, there's a lot of anti-drugs campaigning, we have a younglings, which is like, I think we have about 200 supporters that are under 13 that get educated about how to be a good football supporter, how to be kind of morally good as a supporter. So we have like a lot of engagement on a social level with the supporters, and I think I think for a small club to identify with the local supporters, because we're in the middle of, we're in the north of Sweden, no other team or city is near to us, so we're quite isolated. So I think for us to be kind of the center of the town, it's really good for us to give something back.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. I love hearing these outside the box things. We try a few
Yeah.
things here in the club, here connect with the communities out there, so it's outstanding. So I'm just going to break a little bit there, Ian, and remind people that have tuned in, feel free to ask questions. You should have a control panel there. You can ask us some questions as we go through. If we see some questions pop up, we'll sure to ask Ian. So I'm sure he'll have a go at answering some of those. So Ian, we're going to move on. I heard a lot bounded about in interviews and in articles about the roots of culture and development. So what can you expand upon the roots of culture and development for us?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, the culture in the football club is maybe the most important thing, because it sets the standards for everything that you do every day. So to create a good culture and a positive mindset within the group on a daily basis, and I think the culture is probably the values and the standards that you try to live or adhere to every day. And I think that, so I would say that actually, the start of last season, the culture that we had within the group was quite poor. A lot of new players, a lot of young players, a lot of players coming in maybe thinking firstly about themselves and wanting to prove themselves straight away and not cohesively working. And I think over the year, this group has grown. It's the youngest team in the Swedish top league. And I think we've worked very hard on the culture thing, because I don't think that development can begin unless the culture is right. And I think if your culture is, you have too many people working in different directions, or not understanding roles and responsibilities, or not following the values that you set. And what I try to do at the start of every year is get the players to decide what their values are. How do we want to work? How do we want to look when we play games? How do we want to be perceived when we play games? How do we want to perceive when we travel? How do we want our supporters to look at us? How do we want to look at each other every day when we come in? And get them to decide, okay, this is our standard and this is what we believe we're going to. And then I think you can hold accountability then when things are not right. And I think a positive and strong culture and that level of kind of individual accountability when it isn't good, when you start to get that, you can really get development within the group. Because if you don't have that, it's very hard. Everybody's working on their own thing, and it's a team sport, and 11 players play, but also I've got a squad of 25. The 14 not playing are equally, if not more important, because they have to be the ones that are pushing the best 11. So to create a culture that caters for 25 players, you can't have individualists. So we have to create that kind of culture that drives development then. And I think that, setting the standards and holding accountability right from the word go, I think is a really good way to go.
That's good. Now you mentioned before you had 9 nationalities within the Östersunds group of squad players right now. So each of them also come in with their own national cultural, beliefs and different things that they do within their own countries, just like we do back in the UK. How do you try and get all that together to become, so they can still have their same culture that they have from where they come from and feel comfortable within the culture that you have, so you're meshing them together?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because it is so diverse. So I look at my board, and I've got a young 20-year-old from Ivory Coast that came straight from playing in the Ivorian top league, but a 20-year-old from Nigeria straight from that league, 22-year-old from Chelsea, one that's come from Herenveen in Holland, one that's been at Bayern Munich. So players that have got, some that have come with maybe little or no formal structural coaching behind them, and some that have been in some of the best academies in the world. And they have very, very different culture in terms of how they're used to training, how they're used to playing, the systems and tactics that have been given, or how they used to respond to authority and behave off the pitch. But it's to try to make everybody understand where each other's coming from. So sometimes we could have what I would call like a stereotypical and then you get another one that's from, maybe a different ethnicity from the streets in Gothenburg, and their approach to one problem is very, very different. But understanding why each other reacts like that. So I think we open conversations up about each other's background, what they're used to, how they've been taught before, religion, or all these kind of different things, so that people gain a better understanding or a deeper understanding of why people react or behave. And then we try to have a common, and we do this, like we talk about, we get the players to give their own values and standards, like I said, because then they're all on the same page in our club. That's our culture. So they've all come from wherever they are, but this is us, and this is how we want to look. So they take all of their aspects of where they've been before, and eventually we land on what's the right culture and the way forwards for us as a team, and then we're all in that together. So I think having a deeper understanding of each other's backgrounds and history. So one thing that I got the coaching staff to do was we met with every player individually, and we went through every aspect from mental part of the game to tactical and all of their background and their family background, their social background, and also their learning, how they learn, how they feel they learn best, the ways in which they feel they're communicated best with. And then we have like this overview of every player. So when one player is struggling, we can refer back to it and think about what he's had before, how he's learned. And it's also a crossover for each other, because they need to know how each other responds in different situations. So we've worked quite hard with that, because it's such a diverse culture here.
Okay, good. Well, I know you talked about a couple of the clubs or boys that have come from bigger clubs. Is Blair still with you from West Ham? And
Yeah,
Charlie
Blair,
from
yeah.
Chelsea.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So with bringing in those younger players from those clubs, does that build up a better rapport with the parent, some of these other clubs that you can? Are they been purchased, or are they on loan?
No, we don't have any loans. So Blair was out of contract, so we signed him on a free. Charlie was still under contract at Chelsea, but we bought Charlie. We bought him out. So he came to us. Thomas Isherwood was at Bayern Munich, but then he went to Bradford and his contract was expiring. We got him on a free. So we don't pay big money for players, but we do try to recruit quite astutely. And sometimes we look at players that have been at top clubs, maybe drop down and need a restart, and that's our kind of recruitment model. Rather than taking players like Malmo here, they spend millions on players that are game ready, 27, 28, can come in and in one season deliver immediately. We're taking more younger 21, 22 players, and then maybe they need a little restart, but their potential is quite high. So, but yeah, for sure. I mean, when you see somebody like Charlie, we've had offers for him back in England from good clubs. So it's shown that he can come here, develop, and go back in that environment. And I think that has also created a good link with clubs, top clubs around, really, because they sometimes want to loan players out and see their development on a first team level. And certainly the top league in Sweden's a good one to go.
Well, and that circles me back around about the coaches network. It was interesting when I was trying to get all these webinars together about the coaches network and people wanting to work together and to get, just to talk and get some mission across. But with you in the position you're in, you got Brian, you've got Graham, of course, that you well know. How is it so important to have a coaches network that you can rely upon the different types of things you need to talk about, or even if there's players out there? How important is that coaches network, and how big is that coaches network for you?
I mean, yeah, it's really important, because one thing is to talk about players, and you talk with agents about players, you talk with other coaches about players, but actually as a manager, it can be a lonely job at times, because when things go well, it's fine, but when things don't go well, you are the one that is often in the newspaper blamed, or the one that is blamed by the fans or the players, and you're the one that everybody looks to. So it can be a challenge through those periods. And I think you need a network of people that maybe understand what you're going through in that moment. So then you can talk to them. And even like Graham, I could call Graham and ask him, when this was happening, how did you deal with that? And I've certainly talked to more experienced coaches about, setting up a team, managing upwards to the board. How did you manage those situations? You know, what, how that, things with different players when there's been problems, you know. So I think it's good to cross-reference your own thoughts with people doing a similar job to see how they've tackled things, because it can give you new ideas and a new perspective.
That's good. So going back a little bit to the loan, I know you said you haven't got any loan players now, but having that coaching network, does that help in them saying, hey man, Ian, I've got a player that could do with a little bit of game time just to get game ready and get some minutes under his belt. Have you dealt with some loan players? I think you have, haven't you?
Yeah. We've had quite a few. Yeah, we've had loan players, and
talk to us a little bit about that culture and how you would connect with the actual parent club, and what your expectations and their expectations are on that relationship, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's varied. So I've had a player from Sunderland, and he was a young player in the under-23s, and I think that they were just looking for a good place for him to go, and a place that he could develop. Now, at the time, we could give him some game time because it was a position we needed, so it worked for both. And at that point, I think they were good enough that they didn't need any money back from us. Him developing was enough for them. Sometimes they want some money back for the players to get a reinvestment, but majority of time they want to loan them out so that they can develop to either sell on or bring back to their first team. So I think they often want to see that you have a need for them, and that they can do more than they're doing at their parent club. So if they're at their parent club in the under-23s, they want to see that they're maybe either starting or on the bench for a first team somewhere, and gaining that experience and coming back a better player. Having those relationships with the coaches, you know, Graham knows how I work. He knows me personally, so he knows maybe how I'm going to deal with the players, and he can have a level of trust then when he sends a player to know that he's coming into a good environment. So I think it's good from that point of view, and it's good to build those links, because it's always good if a team like Chelsea or I don't know, Aston Villa or Liverpool want to loan out a player, and you know that he's going to be quality and he's going to come to you and affect your team straight away. And it might be a good situation for both parties. They can send him to us. We need a player. We can develop him. When he comes back to them, he's going to be stronger. So building up those links and that trust is great for the loan network.
Okay, good. So that brings me back down now to your youth academy. So we talked about the Vikings youth academy. What about Östersunds? How does the culture from the youth academy in Östersunds, the first team, and then you've talked about bringing in some of the younger, your recruitment policies. What impact does that have on your youth academy?
Do you know what the biggest problem that we've had here is that, like I said at the start, this is quite a new football club, and when it started, it was in the fourth tier of Swedish football. So amateur, part-time, no money, 50 people in the crowd, 25 of them probably wanted you to lose. So like it was nothing really. And at the same time, they had an academy. So it was more like a football for all, you know, to engage everybody in the community. There's no history. Up here is a skiing town. So the biggest sport is cross-country skiing. The World Cup's hosted here. There's no history for football. It's a winter town known for winter sports. Football doesn't have a pocket here. Football is only now really taking shape in Östersund as the #1 sport since the winning of the Cup and the Europa League and going and beating some of the biggest teams in Europe. Now kids really believe in this town that they might actually be able to play out in Europe, even though they live here in a winter town. Whereas before, I don't think that was real. So, but what happens when the first team gets elevated to the highest level so fast is it takes many years for the academy to come up and reach the same level. So we're still in a case where it's generally not that elite. It's still a football for all environment. So there's actually not many that from our academy at the moment that are capable of stepping up. But I think that football fever took over here 4 or 5 years ago. And that's probably impacted the like 7 and 8 year olds then that are probably like 12 and 13. I think in 4 or 5 years time, you'll see the ripple effect from the Europa League and the academy building and getting stronger. But for now, there is a massive gap, which is one of the reasons why we have to look elsewhere in Sweden or often abroad to recruit players at the moment, because we don't have a constant flow through our own academy system.
So within that academy system and the staff there, what would be a player pathway? You know, you're saying 4 or 5 years time, you've got the 12, 13-year-olds. Yes, they're going to come through. But what about the players that have come through, and what's their pathway look like right now? What does their end product of being in your academy look like?
Coming from our academy?
Yeah, do they go into the working world, or do they get an opportunity to go maybe to lower leagues or abroad? What's their player pathway look like?
A lot of ours end up playing in maybe the 3rd, 4th tier in Sweden, like amateur football, probably working. It's not like in England, you often leave school at 16 and then you're kind of fully immersed in a professional club. Whereas in Scandinavia, you tend to finish all of your education to 18, no matter who you are. So I've worked with players like Mohamed Elanusi, who's at Southampton. I had him when he was 18 in Sarpsborg, but he was still in school. You know, he was still going to school while he was playing in the top league. So he had to balance the two, but he came out with an education. So I think that education is often put first, primary for many young players. And so they have a good situation. Some might go to the States on a scholarship, but to be honest, our academy lads are not at that level yet. So most of them are going and playing amateur football if they're not. But so for us, it's been more about providing something for the bigger community in a football for all enjoyment rather than elite academy. But I think over the next few years, our aim is to try to create a more elite pathway so that we might get this ripple effect from the Europa League and maximize it, so we're getting some of our own products, because ultimately that's the most cost-effective way to run a club, is produce your own.
And I'm presuming you all work together with the academy staff. If there's an academy director, I'm not sure how your setup is there. And you all work together to. Do you have your philosophy of how you want to play in the first team passed on to the academy, regardless of them coming into the team or going to the lower leagues, or do you just let them kind of have their own philosophy and try and train that way?
I think the club, to be honest, the club has had because Graham was here for 7 years. I think Graham had a very clear identity, and I think I was recruited because I play football in a similar way. So I think it's been about the way the club has played and wanted to play. And then they recruit based on that, both coaches, staff and players. So everybody's on a kind of similar page. So our coaches want to play the same way that we play, so that we have a common theme. And the club, if you see any team, you can identify them as one of ours. And I think when I leave, the club will recruit a coach that's thinking in the same mindset, or wants to play the same way. So it isn't like, well, I play this way, you know, try to be fluid and attack and be brave with the ball and control the game. And then when I leave, they go, right, we'll just get a guy in that just wants to sit deep, play 4-4-2, bang it up to 2 big strikers. Because then the whole club breaks, the whole club beneath it can break down. And I've been in situations where I was at Bradford, where every year a new manager came in, Stuart McCall, then Peter Taylor, then Peter Jackson. They all had a different way of playing. And suddenly we had a different remit in the youth team there. And that provided us with some challenges, because we were having to reteach players every time the management changed. So I think having a clear identity is really important, top to bottom.
That's a good answer. Well, I'm going to move on to a player that back in Sir Alex Ferguson's time was touted to be a top player, Ravel Morrison. Now he came to Östersunds a short time, I believe. Even with you had some breaks. You have breaks in the Alistan League, whatever. But you have some breaks. So how was it to manage and integrate him and accept the culture at Östersunds for Ravel, with where he's been and, you know, the journey that he's taken as well?
I mean, he's some player. That's all I'll say. He's some player. I mean, he'd been in Lazio, and then he'd been frozen out for about 6-7 months. I think a new coach had come into Lazio and told him that he wasn't wanted anymore. And he missed the window in the summer. So he had to sit almost a whole 6 months. And I think Ravel is a talented boy, but he's not the kind of kid that's just going to run and run and run to keep himself fit. He's kind of playing football, tennis, and he's like kind of like one of them tainted geniuses that can do almost anything that you want on the pitch. So when he came to us, he was out of shape, but he joined us in Spain. We were in Spain on a pre-season training camp, and he came and joined us on there, and he was probably 5-6 kilos too heavy, and he completely ran the set. He was scary what he can do. Very, very complex character, very, very interesting character to work with. Really nice kid, polite, not what you'd expect if you read everything about him. You wouldn't think, but he's probably grown up a little bit. But also very difficult, hard for him to have the ability that he's got, and sometimes comprehend that not everybody else on the pitch can do the things that he can do, which can sometimes generate frustration. So he was a phenomenal talent. He played some of the games that he played for us. He did some wonderful things. Away from that, fitting into structure, organisation, and team structure sometimes could be difficult for him, because it was best to give him the freedom just to play. And very interesting player. I've worked with some very talented players, but he is a scary talent. And I feel like he left us and went straight to the Premier League to Sheffield United, and I feel like he maybe he needed to play games, and I think that kind of player in that kind of team, maybe he wasn't going to get the amount of matches that he needed. I hoped that he was going to go maybe to the Championship and play every week, and he needed that. But he's now in Middlesbrough, wonderful talent. You have to really work with him to manage him to get the best out of him. But yeah, it was I think I had him for only half a year. We only signed him on a short contract in the January, and he went in the summer. But during that period, we saw some magic things from him.
That's fantastic. Well, so you managed some internationals. I think you've managed some players that played in World Cups, and then you've got all the young boys that your philosophy and the game plan for the club is. So having them all together and trying to create that culture, have you seen any issues? How do you try and mesh that culture with the players that have played at the very highest level with players that are the young and coming through? I think that's always going to be a balance to make. How do you best manage that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you say, we've had players here that have been out in the World Cup 2 years ago, the 2018 World Cup they were playing in, and they came back from that World Cup and then joined the team to play. It's actually quite a mentally hard thing for those players, because like the player that we had, Saman Ghoddos, that was playing in the World Cup, he came back, and I think that he thought that we knew we would probably sell him in that transfer window. But no bids came in during the World Cup, and I think he thought he might go, and then suddenly he's got to come back from a World Cup playing on the world stage against Spain, against Portugal, to then come back to Östersund and now play again, and to realign yourself and motivate yourself again is actually a challenge. So, and actually it's quite motivating for the other players to play with a player that's just been at the World Cup. But actually Saman came back, I think he played 7 games and scored 6 goals. So he was outstanding when he came back, and mentally really, really strong. But I think it's always when you've got a varying, you'll always have, whatever level you work at, you're going to have differentiation between the very, very best and the weakest in the group. And it's no different in a pro team. You're going to have players that play international level and young players that are coming through. Now, people say you can't treat anybody differently, but Saman Ghoddos coming back from a World Cup was probably going to get A, more attention, B, probably be the first one for treatment when he comes in, because he's higher priority within that group. And the young ones have got to understand that I want to get there. I've got to work as hard as he's got to get there, so I can be top priority in this. And I've got to be better than him and work harder than him every day. So I think it's quite good to use those top international players as your key standard points for, okay, this is where you've got to get to, and then also make those international players humble enough to know that you're a leader, because you've been in this situation. You're coming back from a World Cup, everybody's looking up at you. You've got to be a leader in this group, and you've got to help some of the young ones as well. So it's not, I think when you reach that level, it's not only about you. Even though every player has a selfish element in them, when you've reached that pinnacle there of playing in a World Cup and you come back to your club level, you then have a leadership responsibility to, okay, now I've got to impart some of this experience on the rest of the group. And so if you can empower them with a bit of that leadership, I think that's a really good thing to do to help create a more cohesive group, top to bottom.
Fantastic. So I'm going to turn my point to you now. who in your career has been the most influential person that's allowed you to create your philosophy, your style, your coaching style, and your coaching philosophy, and maybe your playing philosophy?
Yeah, do you know what? I don't think there's necessarily like one coach that I've looked at and said he's had more impact than another. I think I've tried to take a bit of everything from all the different people that I've worked with. But I think, like, as I was coming into coaching, I always remember, like, as a kid, the 1990 World Cup being like the World Cup where I fell in love with football, fell in love with Paul Gascoigne, and Bobby Robson was like the man, and not necessarily like the what he was doing as a coach, because when I was a kid, I didn't really look at how someone was as a coach, but how he talked about football, how he talked about players, and how you conduct yourself values-wise. For me, like, he was setting the standard. And then as you go into coaching, you start looking at coaches that are playing in a way that really excites you. Guys like Bielsa or Guardiola, Klopp, all these kind of Cruyff are really. But even in England, Venables, Glenn Hoddle, I thought were brilliant coaches for the England national team. So you kind of like look at players that you love to see. And then I try to put myself, when I'm coaching, I try to put myself in the stands and say, what would excite me if I came to the stadium today? What would I want to see? And so I try to reference back the kind of football that I enjoyed watching when I was supporting, even as a neutral. And then, okay, what were those coaches doing? So kind of quite a broad, try to take a broad spectrum of different styles, but see what I believe people want to see and try to put that on the pitch, and those kind of qualities. And then there's been, of course, Graham. I speak with Graham a lot. And although we both moved out to Scandinavia around the same time, of course, he's stepped a few steps ahead of me now. But it's good to know that that is possible, and that he's gone from Swedish top league, and he sat in this office here where we are talking now. And 2 years later, he's in the Premier League, and it's possible to do that. And I think Ronny Deila was also a young coach in Norway who ended up at Celtic. And won the league twice in Celtic. He's at New York City now in the MLS. And he, you know, I talk a lot with Ronnie as well, because he kind of is, of course, again, a couple of maybe steps ahead, but if I like, I'm trying to follow in that path, and it's good to hear his ups and downs as well. So to follow those guys is quite inspirational.
That's good. So, I mean, I could ask you the question, where do you see yourself 5 years? But really, what would you like your career path to end up? What would you really, when you look back at your life, what would you say, man, I've done it there, and that's what I want to, that's where I want to be, that's what I want to be able to do, or at least have an opportunity to?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would always say I want to work at the highest level that's possible. So, you know, of course, to develop and see if I can go take the challenge of being in a top league, but you know, I think when you look back, success in football, or success, like how I view success, is maybe different to how the supporters view success, because the supporters look at the result and deem whether it's good or bad. And at the end, if results are bad, I'll probably get fired, and then I have to look for a new job. But I don't know if I want to define myself by that as success, more by the relationships that I build, what the club thinks, or the people or the players think of me when I leave. And how they've developed under me. So I think as a coach, that if you have that as your primary, my success is in the players, and that's really important to me, that whenever I finish coaching, there's maybe a back catalogue of players that I can say, I feel like I had a good impact, in touch, and that's a really good thing. But also on a personal success level, I want to win things and go to the highest level possible. So that can take time, but you know, it's hard work, and hopefully I can develop and get that opportunity. And along the way, you know, if you're helping players to develop, I think that's a great thing.
Well, Ian, you're still young, and you've done a fantastic job already. We both took different routes, I guess. After that 18 years, I went to the youth market,
Yeah.
and you went into the professional game, and I can only turn around and say how proud I am of where you've got to, and the things that you're doing, and the way you conduct yourself. You're doing an awesome job, an absolutely amazing job. So I absolutely commend you on that. Guys, if you're listening in, I'll give you a couple of minutes if you want to write in some questions and ask Ian here. But apart from that, Ian, I really do appreciate giving up your time. You know, I know time is in this present climate that we're in, there might be a little bit more time. So, but normally when you're in work, just as I am here, as busy as I am here, it can get busy. So I really do appreciate your time away from your family and taking the time to be here with us on the webinar today. So we'll give it a couple of seconds here in case there's any questions come through. Was there anything else you wanted to add in? Anything that I didn't ask you a question of that you'd like to? We're aiming this at coaches and budding players, and I think with you being as young as you are and the route you took to become a professional coach, head coach of in a top Scandinavian league and club, is there anything you would like to add that I may have missed out?
No, I mean, I would say especially for coaches, and it's certainly young coaches that are looking to develop and progress in the game, I would just say that I think any barriers that you think there are probably only barriers that you have in your own head. Things are possible it's possible to go and coach at professional level and top level, whether you've played, whether you've not played, despite what your experience is. I think it's generally hard work, being open to make mistakes, learn and develop, and taking as much information from different people. Of course, you need an opportunity at some point, and you can be fortunate to get that. But I think that barriers in coaching are something that are only there to be overcome, and probably things that you put in your mind. When I moved into the pro game, I had a lot of fears about how I was going to be perceived, or if I was going to be successful, or if it was going to work. But often, most of those fears are just things that I put in myself. When I got there and started working, it was just football. And I would encourage anybody that if they have some ambitions, just to be direct and follow them and trust in themselves. And I think that you can, you can have the success that you want if you do those things.
That's fantastic advice. Fantastic advice. Well, again, thank you so much, Ian. It's been an actual pleasure. I'm hoping to visit you for a day in October. I guess it'll be a little chilly then, but I'll try and come prepared if that's still offer open. So I look forward to that. But apart from that, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm hoping that this is a little bit different questions to what you'd normally be asked in some of those interviews to make it a little bit fresher. So thank you very much, Ian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure, mate. And like I said before, you're always welcome here.
Fantastic. Fantastic.